Let's go to the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Sean Deveney, longtime NBA writer for the Sporting News, as we're about a week into the NBA season. But, Sean, it's always hot topics around here with this team, as you know. We saw the Sixers and the Celtics last week. We saw the Sixers last night, the Pistons without Ben Simmons. And we saw two different Markelle Fultzes, one as the guy off the ball, one as the guy handling the ball. After the game last night, Sean, he said, I feel very comfortable with the ball in my hand. I'm going to ask you about the decision that Brett Brown's – not really a decision. He's not taking Ben Simmons off the point. But is Markelle Fultz, in your eyes and in the NBA eyes, right now a point guard?
You know, I mean, I think people are still quite unsure what he is, you know, and obviously, you know, as you say, he looked better playing point guard. He looked more comfortable. That's what he's used to. That's what he's been all his life. That, you know, he's never going to be that with this team. So he's going to have to be able to adjust to a different style of play. So yeah, I mean, whether he's a point guard or not, whether that's natural for him or not, really doesn't matter, because he's with the Sixers, and Ben Simmons isn't going to be giving up that role. So you know, he's either going to become a backup point guard if they ever do make that change, or he's going to wind up somewhere else. You know, that's really the only choice here. So right now for them, you know, they've got to figure out if he can play shooting guard. If he can't, then they've got to they'll have a decision to make with him.
Yeah, I know that you know, last night he got the start as the point guard. Is Brett Brown better off trying to find out if he can mesh with Ben Simmons, or is he better off just pulling the plug on this experiment and saying, you know what, I mentioned it before you came on, Sean, like use him as Golden State's version of Livingston, and he just runs the second unit?
Yeah, I mean, obviously he's number one pick, and you're hoping for more than that from him, right? I mean, you'd hope that that's, although, you know, considering where he's been, you probably would take that. You'd probably welcome that at this point. You know, my feeling from the beginning with this was that you give it till around, you know, the middle of December or so, when you're about 30 games in, and if things have not come around, if you're not sure he can play with Ben Simmons, or if it's become clear that he can't, then you make the switch back and put JJ back in the starting five. But you got to give it a little bit of time. You know, I don't think it'd be the right thing to hit the panic button yet, because you can understand the logic of what Brett Brown is trying to do here, and you can understand how if Fultz can come through even a little bit, how this makes the whole team better. But yeah, if it continues to be as up and down as we've seen, and it continues to look like the kid's only comfortable playing point guard, then yeah, you're going to have to make a change. But I think you still have to give it, you know, another month and a half before you make that decision.
Sean, how about last night? And I guess looking at last night as a micro and zooming out maybe to the bigger picture, but starting with last night, I think the biggest thing that people said when Brett Brown was criticized for not playing Markelle Fultz in the fourth was, well, he wasn't playing well defensively. I don't know how much I agree with that notion that he was getting lit up, or the only guy specifically getting lit up. What has been your impression so far?
Nobody played defense last night.
Thank you. Last night of Markelle Fultz on D, and kind of Markelle playing D overall so far.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I don't think it's his strong suit yet, and you know, obviously he's had a whole year to kind of to at least observe and get his feet wet with it, and it's still not a strong suit for him, and you know, that's going to be it's something that you get with most rookies, of course, but I think you'd hope that he was a little ahead of the curve, and it certainly doesn't look like he is. So yeah, I mean, that's going to continue to be an issue with this whole notion of whether he should be starting or not.
Is there something, and you've been around this game, and you know how coaches work specifically with players, and it's not just specific to the NFL, NBA. We see it in the NFL and other sports as well. But do you think that it's not just, or how much of it do you think is not just, hey, I don't believe yet in Markelle Fultz in Brett Brown's mind? It's also, hey, I've seen T.J. McConnell play for years. I know what this kid is capable of. And there's this trust factor that might even hurt coaches at times, that they don't move away from guys they really know about as opposed to the unknown.
Yeah, I think there's every coach gets into that a little bit and has to make those kinds of decisions. And I think for Brett, I think there is sort of it goes beyond trust. I think he has a certain attachment to TJ.
That's a better word, attachment.
During the worst times of the rebuild,
Covington
he was
too.
The guy who. Yeah, right. Those were the guys who kind of were byproducts of the process by finding guys and giving them a chance and them cashing in on that, and Brett put in a lot of work to develop those guys, and I think he's loath to just turn his back on them at this point, especially when you get into situations where when you look at the talent that they have. What they need in crunch time, they need guys who can make plays, but more than that, who can just not make mistakes. You got to get the ball to Joel, obviously, and in the meantime, don't make a mistake. And I think he has that factor certainly with TJ at this point, and obviously, despite the way the game ended last night with Robert Covington as well.
Sean, how do you think Brett Brown has managed Joel Embiid and setting him up with open looks and being in the right spot on the offensive end, specifically in their half-court offense, and especially, as you just alluded to, late in games in the fourth quarter by minimizing mistakes?
Yeah, I always feel like they could do that more. Like that's something that you'd like to see him really take over games down the stretches. It's tough when you're a center because you're usually relying on somebody else getting the ball to you. But 4 games in, I think they're doing a better job of it this year. It certainly seems like he's a factor in the fourth quarter. That wasn't always the case last year. Last year was such an interesting year for them in terms of their ability to win close games, and they just weren't very good at it. And I always thought that a lot of that was that they weren't going to Embiid enough. They weren't getting the ball to their best player enough down the stretch. I think they're doing a better job of that this year.
Yeah, they went to him in overtime to take the last 3-point shot. They kind of set that play up for him. Ben Simmons, by the way, questionable for tonight. He didn't practice Monday. He didn't play last night. We'll see what happens tonight. So we'll see how they use Markelle Fultz in the game tonight. Big story, obviously. Sean, I want to get your take. You saw, obviously, Philly and Boston on opening night. And since then, Boston, after that game, Boston looked really deep. They looked really good. And they've had a couple of losses. They lost the game to Toronto pretty handily. They had the game at home against Orlando that I think surprised a lot of people. Any early season things that you could take from what you see from Boston? One of my concerns, if I was a Boston fan coming into the season, was, okay, you got a lot of great, talented players. How am I utilizing them? Who's getting the shots? How am I breaking it all up? What are some of the stumbling blocks they've had early that may linger, that could linger?
Yeah, I think there is still some question as to what the pecking order is going to be here. Obviously, Kyrie is the sort of the focal point of the offense. He's been terrible so far. He's really had, and he was terrible in the preseason as well. But you kind of say, oh well, it's just the preseason. But that's carried over into the regular season. He just hasn't been able to hit anything really at this point. They haven't gotten the same sort of ball movement that leads to the open looks that they had last year. I think that's been a real thing with them, that they're still sort of figuring that out, and that's probably a natural progression, just in terms of integrating new guys or integrating guys who have Jason Tatum, for instance. He needs shots, and that wasn't necessarily the case throughout the regular season last year. So integrating sort of the new Jason Tatum into this lineup, and now you've got Gordon Hayward as well. So there's a lot that they're still figuring out. It'll be interesting to see whether Brad Stevens can get that to a point where he's comfortable and where everybody's comfortable with their roles. Everybody's saying the right things right now. But I know, and you know, that when we get to the middle of the season, if someone's not getting the shots, if someone is sort of pushed to the back of the line, who just doesn't feel like they should be there, there's a real chance that chemistry and that those tensions are going to pop up. You know, these guys are professionals. They need minutes. They need shots in order to get their contracts. So, of course, that's going to be an issue. And I think, you know, you talk about what could linger. I think that's the real thing that as they figure things out, somebody's going to get left out. And is that guy going to be a problem or not?
Sean, I need a favor because here in Philadelphia, we've got smart fans, but every now and again they get caught up in this myopic point of view, and they think that the Bucks are just Giannis. Now, granted, you look at the stats and everything. If you hadn't watched Milwaukee, you think, all right, that's pretty much a one-man show. But do us a favor and explain to the masses why Milwaukee is such a good basketball team, if you can, without even mentioning Giannis.
I mean, Chris Middleton, he does not get enough credit. You know, he had an injury a couple of years ago, and that kind of set him back. And then last year was in and out. In the playoffs, if you watch that first-round playoff series against the Celtics, he was fantastic. I mean, he was if Giannis was one, then he was 1A. I mean, he was there were times where he was the better player than Giannis. And he's a guy who, you know, the second-round pick came up and had to work hard to get where he is. And this year he has been fantastic. I was looking at his numbers. He's shooting almost 60% from the field and something like 65% from the three-point line. You know, it's only 3 games, but the guy who shoots a lot, and you know, he is really fantastic. Versatile, plays both ends of the floor. You know, I think that he's probably the most underlooked player in the Eastern Conference. You know, the rest of the team, look, they have some weak spots, no question. They're not very deep. You know, I don't love Eric Bledsoe as a point guard, but he's played well to start the year and is a good defensive point guard. You know, Malcolm Brogdon has been you know, a solid player for them. So, you know, they've got some other guys, but I think Chris Middleton is the guy who just does not get enough credit for what he does for that team.
Sean Deveney, everybody, Sporting News NBA writer, as the season is off to a fun start, and we got a lot of great storylines, Sixers and Bucks tonight. 9:30 tip-off. We'll have it for you live on 97.3 ESPN. Always appreciate it, Sean. Thanks so much, pal.
All right, thanks for having me.